Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. I'm Tyra Leibmann. I'm the Associate Vice President of Global Programs of NYU. I'm based in New York City and sadly have been grounded for a year now, but love all that NYU has to offer around the world. I welcome you to this discussion of global urban careers. NYU does have a strong focus on global engagement and on urban issues with our 3 degree granting campuses in New York, Abu Dhabi, and Shanghai, plus our 12 global locations in some of the world's greatest cities. And we're eager to prepare students to take advantage of all the opportunities at the intersection of global and urban. This event is designed to give an opportunity for NYU students to learn more about careers addressing urban issues from global or international perspectives. Our distinguished panelists have agreed to share information about their careers and to share tips to students who are interested in exploring careers in this area. And following the panel, a representative from the Wasserman Center for Career Development will share some pointers for students who are interested in pursuing careers with an international component. And before I introduce the panelists, we want to make a little bit of a plug for some information on an opportunity that may be of interest to those of you joining today. And I also want to note that this event is being recorded. So Chris, could you talk about the showcase, please?
Sure. Thank you, Tyra. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. Before we start with the panel, I want to share information on an opportunity that may be of interest to some of the undergraduate students who are joining today. And that's what we hope will be the first annual NYU Global Urban Showcase. So as Tyra mentioned, here at NYU, we are deeply urban and deeply global, and we're excited to offer this opportunity to showcase our students' work that sits at that nexus of global and urban. So the Global Urban Showcase was designed to really celebrate and feature the best scholarly and creative work being conducted by our undergraduate students that is both global and urban in focus. So it's open to all NYU students, no matter which site you're located at. There is an opportunity to submit work that takes many different forms, including longer papers or projects, shorter papers or projects, and performance or artistic or creative work. The work itself can be produced at any time starting last June, so June 2020, through this spring. And it's appropriate for students who might want to use this as a chance to take up some work they started in the past, maybe back when we all had the chance to spend time at the global sites, and revise it and improve it through an iterative process and submit a better version of work that was begun at an earlier time. All the submissions are going to be due in late April, and there will be a submission form online for students who are interested in participating. So I'm going to post the link into the chat, and stay posted to this site for more details. Thanks, Tyra. Back to you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Chris Day, for everything. She is so wonderful. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Johanna Lovecchio. She's from the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes and is the associate director there, specializing in urban climate adaptation planning and public infrastructure project design that is forward-looking and conscious of community-based and ecosystem resilience. There, she manages the Resilience Accelerator. I love that. I think we've all had some acceleration of our resilience this year. But anyway, I want to learn more about the Resilience Accelerator. It says it delivers strategic support, technical design, and climate systems research and intensive local workshops to advance resilience project design and implementation in partnership with local governments around the world. Very interesting. Most recently, Johanna led a year-long engagement with Tel Aviv Yafo in Tel Aviv. NYU does have a site in Tel Aviv called Urban Heat, Equity, Resilience, and the Future of the Public Realm, which assessed citywide vulnerability to heat impacts and generated community-based urban design concepts to be piloted by the municipality. Amazing. Prior to that, she was a senior analyst and program manager at HR&A Advisors. She's worked as a city planner at the Department of City Planning in New York, and she holds a master's of urban planning from the Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service and degrees in environmental studies and Met studies from CAS at NYU. Johanna, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Elena Madison from the Project for Public Spaces. Elena is an urban planner with rich experience in the planning and design of parks, plazas, campuses, and the public spaces of civic and cultural institutions. A veteran of placemaking, Elena has a passion for working with people and communities to create the places they love. She's a dedicated practitioner of collaborative work in all aspects of public space improvement, from visioning, concept development and design, to programming, place management, and implementation. She's directed many projects in places where Project for Public Spaces has had its biggest impact, places such as Houston, Detroit, Atlanta, San Antonio, and my hometown of Oklahoma City. Most recently, she's been focused on forging relationships with corporate funders through corporate social responsibility initiatives, like Southwest Airlines, Heart of the Community Grant Program, with 20 implemented projects across the US, which she headed. Elena also has experience leading training and technical assistance efforts in Central and Eastern Europe, focused on building local knowledge and capacity planning with recent technical assistance projects in Poland, Russia, and Bulgaria. She's delivered pilot projects and capacity building assistance to a vast number of international partners in places around the world, ranging from Belgium and Italy to South Africa and Malaysia. Elena, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And our third panelist is Dr. Vanessa Leon. She's both at NYU Wagner and has a firm called Pincina, which is an international urban planning and public policy firm she founded in 2010. At NYU Wagner, she's the assistant clinical professor of urban planning and public service. Her research and practice centers on the political economy of disasters, primarily in small island developing states. She has conducted in-depth analysis of Haiti's institutional development over the past 30 years in order to evaluate the country's post-earthquake capacity for improved local governance and public service delivery. With funding from the Natural Hazards Center with the support of National Science Foundation, she's conducting an evaluation of the role of crisis leadership on pandemic outcomes in Barbados. Her work explores how Caribbean nations might better position themselves to maintain the well-being of their citizens, economies, and their physical landscapes to mitigate current and imminent disaster threats. Dr. Leon received the 2020 Professor of the Year Award in her first year as a full-time faculty member. Other accolades include the Impact Award in 2018 for Young Women Rising by the American Women for International Understanding, as well as being inducted into the Haitian Roundtable's 1804 list as one of the top 5 to watch among Haitian Americans in 2015. Dr. Leon was also named one of 40 urban leaders under 40 by Next City in 2014. Dr. Leon obtained her PhD in public and urban policy from the New School and got her Master of Urban Planning from NYU Robert Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. She graduated magna cum laude from Brandeis with a BA in African and African American Studies and with double minors in Education Studies and Social Justice and Social Policy. Dr. Leon, thank you so much for being with us today. So appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, these panelists have a lot of experience in international contexts, in urban contexts, in planning, and in helping cities do many different things. So please tell us a little bit about your career, focusing on the work you've done that is urban and global and international. First, Johanna, would you please go first?
Sure. Thank you again for having me. This is really exciting to be back with this community. I'm an NYU alum and really proud to connect today. This is such an amazing panel. Also, wow, those bios are incredible. I'm so honored to be amongst them. But my career, I guess I'd like to start, with NYU. My exposure to the global and urban really started at NYU in many ways. I was an undergrad there, and I really was so excited by a lot of the opportunities at NYU. I had the incredible privilege of going to that school in the first place and then being able to take advantage of a lot of the programs. So I was able to study in Florence for a semester, and some summer programs in London looking at urban design and architecture. And then I also took advantage of a partnership between NYU and the University of Cape Town. At the time I was studying urban planning and environmental studies. And there were so many rich opportunities to expand what that meant in a global dimension. And then my first real job was at the city planning department here in New York City. After having done many internships throughout my time at NYU, but what really changed things for me was during that time, Hurricane Sandy happened in New York City, and really was a profound pivot moment for the city of New York in many ways, and I think a shift in how people were thinking about the intersections of planning and design and climate change, and what it means to really look at climate change as an entry point to broader systemic vulnerabilities in a city. And as I continued on in my career, I began working in consulting, where I had my main client was the Rockefeller Foundation, who was beginning a large resilience portfolio. And at the time, resilience was kind of like the new sustainability in terms of the language and rhetoric being used. So did a lot of thinking about what that meant conceptually and theoretically. Put it into practice when the Rockefeller Foundation funded a project to basically test a capacity building program at the global scale to see how we might support local governments and municipalities in project design, recognizing that cities all around the world are very different in their historical contexts, in the types of climate risk that they might have, in the social vulnerabilities of place, the legacies of that place, and that climate is sort of a consistent threat and hazard all around the world. And many places have similar challenges in addressing those risks. So was able to pilot that program globally, and then that turned into my institutionalized position at the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes, where I run the Resilience Accelerator program. And over the past 2.5 years, we've worked with local governments and civic organizations around the world, from Montevideo to SDLC to multiple cities in the US, but then also in Europe. My bio mentioned the project in Tel Aviv, which I'm happy to talk more about, but also in India, in Indonesia, and also working on an interesting project now in Canton, Vietnam. Lots and lots of different risks, but many similar challenges that we try to apply some of the skills and expertise of the center.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm hearing the word risk and some disaster, and that's sort of a common theme. So I'm going to ask Vanessa Leon to go next, since that also features in her bio and experience.
Yeah, interestingly enough, my story starts at NYU as well in an unanticipated way. I was back in 2010 in my final semester of my Master of Urban Planning program. And back then it was just a very different time. President Obama was in his first term, and this excitement of, my president's Black, and there's all this housing policy happening in the country. And I just wanted to move to DC and work on affordable housing policy. Nowhere could I've ever imagined January 12th around 4:55, 4:53 in the afternoon, a 7.0 earthquake striking Haiti, where my family is from. I'm the first person in my family born in the United States. My father at the time has just a way of being in the wrong place at the wrong time a lot of times, was visiting family in Haiti. And it was a harrowing few days waiting to find out if he was alive. Thankfully, he was. We did lose one of my cousins, unfortunately. She was a university student, just 6 days shy of her 21st birthday.
Mm.
I have tons of friends who lost, a single parent, both parents, entire families, aunts, uncles, everyone included. And so this thing and this place that I'm connected to by ancestry just became so prominent that I was here getting a planning degree at a time that Haiti needed urban planners more than ever before. And I just felt like I had to do something about it, but I didn't know what that something was. And so I spent weeks and months going to every conference, symposium, you name it. Like, hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm an urban planner. I'm Haitian. I really want to help. And people say, that's amazing. Your country needs you. You should do that. And no one was telling me how to do that or who was doing that. And so somewhat naive, I'll admit. I decided to start a firm. For better or for worse, the slogan "Haiti's open for business" took hold. And so I thought, okay, if I was a company, somehow I can re-engage in redevelopment opportunities. I'm going to go to Haiti and see what happens. To make a very 10-year, long 10-year story short, I did find my way in Haiti, stumbled around for a little bit, had a variety of experiences from working with really hyper-local projects in rural, also quake-affected communities, but outside of the capital, and weren't getting the assistance necessarily that a lot of the larger NGOs and aid organizations were providing, and doing a lot of like local capacity building work. Learned so much from the community. I mean, and I'll talk about that some more with some of the upcoming questions we have, up through being able to advise the Haitian Ministry for Planning and External Cooperation. And it's through that advising opportunity that I was doing my PhD at the time. So I was sort of like in school by day and then like trying to fly to Haiti every weekend that I could. And it's
Wow.
through that opportunity that the idea for my dissertation was born, realizing some of the institutional challenges that sort of has Haiti in this perpetual state of crisis. As we speak, unfortunately, Haiti is in a massive crisis. And so my work looked at sort of post-dictatorship, which ended in 1986, Haiti's longest standing dictatorship. There was this big move for like decentralized governance and local empowerment and this and that. And I was like, 30 years later, we've not moved the curve. Why? Why is that? And so I look into those issues from a governance perspective and how institutions impact, good planning that can or can't happen, and how we might sort of be able to overcome that. So planning, governance, community engagement, everything in between is sort of that Haiti portfolio. And more recently, expanding my work into the broader English-speaking Caribbean. I'm doing some work in Barbados, also a personal story in that my fiance, soon-to-be husband, is from there. But Barbados is also at a very interesting time in its history. The first female prime minister who's been a rock star, both in the region but across the world, really heightening the impact of climate change on small island developing states that tend to sort of not get the same voice or sort of seat at the table when it comes to some of these global discussions. And even though a lot of our countries are like little specks on the map, we do contribute to the global economy, to the global community in a lot of ways that can't be ignored. And so looking at what it means to have such a resilient, dynamic leader in this space around the pandemic right now, but how this might translate to how small island states could have a bigger voice and perspective when it comes to larger things like climate change and resilience.
Thank you. That's an amazing story. And students, I just want to point out that so far, Johanna has mentioned her early experience studying away in Florence and then taking advantage of other opportunities just to go out and see what she saw and learn what she could learn from those experiences. And Vanessa just mentioned that she just somewhat naively, I think is what you said, wandered around Haiti saying, how can I help? And look what happened. So you got to take advantage of the things that might be in front of you and you're not exactly sure what to make of them at the time. So next we'll have Elena Madison speak on her experiences in Project for Public Spaces and International and Urban.
Well, thank you, Tyra, and such a pleasure, Johanna and Vanessa, to be on the same panel with you. I think my experience is quite different, but we have definitely common points. I'm a planner by training, like I guess both of you. I did not go to NYU. I went to Hunter for my master's degree, but I have been at Project for Public Spaces for, God, almost 20 years at this point. And we're a nonprofit planning and design and educational organization focused specifically on public spaces. And our offices have always been around NYU. So I feel we're fairly connected to NYU. Back, I guess, a long time ago, before the year 2000, I think some of the capstone programs were connected to the work. So I feel there's definitely a lot of connections, but in my professional experience, my work has always focused, I guess, in a way more positive aspects of urban life, specifically on public space and working in public space with communities. And it's so exciting to hear what you're doing with resilience and with disaster preparedness, because now we see more and more how a lot of major social issues, including public health and resilience and social inclusion, all kind of intersect in public space. So it's very exciting to see recognition for that today. But I have to say, it has been a struggle. It took many years for the practice that I practice in our organization and many others, placemaking, to become something that is recognized as an approach to urban issues and to collective work on urban issues. And that is really kind of the origin of my international experiences. I have to also disclose I am originally from Bulgaria, so that is my international connection. I left Bulgaria to come to undergraduate school here in New York. I had studied before that in France. I'd spent some time in Europe. So as Johanna and Vanessa, I've had an experience of the urban world and urban issues in other places outside of the US and outside of New York, which we all know is very special and unique. And I think that gave me a better perspective when working with international communities. So some of our early international work at Project for Public Spaces that I was involved with, Johanna, you mentioned the Rockefeller Foundation. Our work was supported way back in the early 2000s by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And they were funding a lot of these. I see Johanna nodding her head. They were funding a lot of capacity building and know-how transfer in different areas. And they weren't necessarily interested in public space or urban design, but they were interested in democratic participatory decision-making. So they approached Project for Public Spaces, and in the 2006, 2007, 2008, we had a series of programs training partners in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe of what we called placemaking, and basically giving them a methodology to implement. And the interesting thing was that the intent of our funder was not necessarily let's fix the public realm. It was really about let's learn together how to do democratic, participatory, open decision-making, how to develop those skills of listening and sharing and learning. So those early experiences for me were traveling around Serbia for weeks at a time and working with all the different US aid organizations that were actually providing aid in Serbia, and running workshops with communities to talk about public spaces, which was not seen as something that USA would provide to a country. We did a lot of work later on in Poland, in Hungary. We had connections in the Czech Republic. We helped in Prague start one of their most successful farmers market programs, which may sound counterintuitive for some of you. I see in the chat that there's someone from Bulgaria. So for those of you who know markets in Central and Eastern Europe, you're like, oh, why do they need help with farmers markets? But that was something that was really needed in the mid 2000s, before 2010. And it's really exciting to see how some of these projects have totally taken off. So my experience,
thank you. And I will say NYU also has a study away site in Prague. So I just have to keep plugging, you know.
Oh, of course, of course. Well, and Prague is a wonderful place.
So beautiful.
And it's also made a huge progress in improving and really enlivening public spaces outside of the historic, beautiful city center. In the you know, popular housing developments, which in Czech they were calling panelaks or panels in other places. So it was really exciting to kind of see the methodology and see people and communities take it and kind of run with it and make it their own and interpret it in their own way. So I know we're running on time. Yes. I will conclude by telling you that I feel the final result of many years of work and engagement with communities internationally is really this budding international placemaking movement that we were at the center of and continue to be. And it's really exciting to see that communities around the world have taken that idea on and made it their own, and sometimes look at things in a completely different way, but we're all kind of part of this movement together.
Yeah. So so all very different stories, very rich stories, and looking back, it's always hard to see where you might go from here forward, but looking back, what are some of the, like, name 3 qualities or experiences that were formative for you or that you think are important for individuals who want to work on issues around urban in a global or international context? Like what, like just real quick, sort of 3 characteristics, 3 experiences or aha kind of moments for you. Vanessa, do you want to go first?
Sure, I had a feeling. Wow. You know, Elena brought this up, but honestly, it's sometimes the intangible pieces, right? Like listening has been so invaluable. Sometimes, particularly when you're working in a developing country context, you know, there's, whether it's intentional or not, and unfortunately Americans are known in the not best way for having this sort of like, I know more than you, let me tell you what you need, but really listening to community people and trying to understand the world as they see it in their perspective has been so invaluable to me. A lot of the communities that I worked in, folks have never had more than like a 5th grade education, knew way more than I could have, you know, with my master's at the time and eventual doctorate. So listening, humility, being willing to learn and to see life from someone else's vantage point as much as possible. Perspective, yeah. Listening, humility. And I don't know, I just sort of treating people with dignity in the sense that, you know, any of us, if you change the circumstances, our lives could have been so different, right? Like had my parents not fled a dictatorship and made it to the United States and I was American born, you know, I remember, so a formative experience, I had a driver drive me around Haiti, really great guy, maybe about like 2, no more than 4 years older than me. And I was shocked to find that out. But the only difference is my parents made it out and his didn't. And so I had a different, you know, life. And here he is being my driver. And it's just, yeah, we are all human, and treating people with dignity and respect and love and just the intangible qualities just means so much when you're working in this context.
Great.
Yeah, I can go
Thank,
on and on about that, but I would say those would be the key things that come to mind.
thank you. Johanna, you
Great
wanna
answer.
add to that list?
I could probably talk all day about this question. And a lot of it echoes, I think, what Vanessa was just describing. I think this notion of humility is a really big one, and one that continues to come up, I guess, in my work all the time. And I think it's listening, like Vanessa was describing. It's also doing the work of learning on your own time. I think a lot of times, this is a big challenge, I guess, in the spaces that I've been in a lot, that are often consulting or external organizations to local government or local community. And there is a big responsibility, I think, that comes with that. There's an Americanness, a kind of type A New Yorkerness, I think, that we bring, which can be helpful in some regard. It can also be kind of detrimental, because you do kind of inhabit this "I know better" mindset, which you have to constantly be aware of. And I've found that the awareness of that is one thing. The doing your homework about the legacies that you carry into a place also is a really, really big part of any job when you have the privilege of working with people around the world. And I think it goes a long way, because you realize what you don't know, and that's okay, but you have to find people to work with who do know and do represent a different point of view from yours. And a lot of times that translates also into being creative and having access to funding that supports those types of partnerships, because a lot of times funding is not set up in such a way that makes it easy to develop trust over a long period of time, or to take time with research, or to build the types of partnerships that you think are needed to advance a project. So that's a kind of having that hat on, I think, is a big deal. The other thing I'd also say are flexibility. You'd have to be very comfortable working across cultures, again, not assuming anything about people. Late night phone calls, lots of traveling on airplanes. There's a flexibility to that I think you have to inhabit. And thinking across scales, which is a big thing that comes up in my job a lot. I think, we're all urban planners, so we're sort of thinking about the scale of the urban a lot. But there is a flexibility, I think, that's required in this field, where you really have to think about the intersectionality between what's happening in a human level experience, to the home that they live in, to the space that they walk around in, to the city that they're in, to the world that impacts every dimension of that experience. So representing that, being able to think kind of up and down in that way is, I think, also a big deal.
Important, really important points. And Elena, do you want to add to that fantastic list of listening, humility, perspective, doing your homework, you don't know it all, flexibility, and appreciation of scaling?
Oh, I love how you summarized it all. In the placemaking work that we do, we start with some basic principles of approaching the work and the work with the community. And the number one principle is the community is the expert. And another principle is you can't do it alone. So I think those two really foundational ideas have helped me tremendously work in all contexts. And it is about humility and listening. That's how the community is the expert. And that's how engagement becomes spontaneous and appropriate. And I was reading in the chat, there was a question from someone about cultural differences and a Western mindset. And I think it's different when the approach is actually brought in and given to the local partners to interpret in their own way. And that's another way the community becomes an expert. I also have to say that in my work, we're not necessarily, we're grappling with some harder questions, but we're generally focused on something positive, improving the public realm for everybody. I think with resilience or disaster recovery, you have some real negative challenges that you have to address. My experience has mostly been that people are positive, people want to do something good for their community, and this is just the tool that we're giving them, and we're not telling them it's the only one. So definitely being open, listening, trusting that the community is the expert, and trusting that there is always room for more.
Yeah.
I think
Wonderful.
that's one of the really important facets of the work that I appreciate and love. That I'm not approaching it as I am the expert and everybody else is here to learn from me. This is really a collective learning experience or a collective sharing experience, and there is always room for more hands to make light work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes before we get into the introduction of Liz Paul, who is from the Wasserman Career Development Center and who will be able to discuss a little bit more some opportunities for developing your career and wrestling with your questions if you're interested in a career on urban and global intersections. So there have been a few questions from the audience already. And one was definitely what Elena just pointed out about culture, and then how do you balance maybe some of the competing demands when you are in a global context and your funders want one thing, the community another, you see another way. Balancing your strategies to keep moving the work forward. Other questions from the audience at the moment?
I can provide a perspective about that question. Do you want
Sure.
one? I think this has come up in all three of us, but I noticed a lot of us do workshops and convenings. And I think that's one way to address this tension in a mindful way. Right, balancing different interests is often a question, sometimes a question of getting people around the table to have a conversation and to be transparent about what people need to see or want to see. And a lot of it is incumbent on a facilitation mindset to help create an environment for some of those things to come to the surface, and then creating a framework for conflict or non-intersection to be resolved, which can be tricky. And one thing that we do in our workshops is we make that very physical. There's something about drawing a line on a map or making a drawing of what something could look like to get it out of an abstract way and grounded in what it looks like in the world and in a human being's experience in that world, that can be helpful in negotiating and resolving some of that, visualizing it.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I'd like to briefly chime in as well, I would say being a reflective practitioner is so super important. So
Excellent.
I don't have time to go, into all the details. My first Haiti experience, I was very young. And, I was in this position where I was with an American team funded by some pretty large donors. But I also spoke the language and, Haitian American. And so at some point, attention sort of started rising in the project where the people were like, wait, whose side are you really on? Like, you're speaking the language like us, you're connecting with us, but you're over there with them and we don't trust them given the history in Haiti, and rightfully so. And I was in this very sticky situation that got personally challenging. So I had to remove myself from it and kind of take a step back from Haiti for like about a year and a half, and then figure out how am I going to re-engage. And so I'm actually, this is a good reminder that I need to get this piece out, but I'm working on a journal article that sort of talks about this insider-outsider position that I didn't realize that I was playing, but that was able to help me navigate being in the halls of power in Haiti, as well as being in the halls of power of like DC and the State Department and such, and how owning the perspective I was coming from on either side helps me sort of make my way through, you know? So I remember there was a time that, you know, the community, there was a lot of activity, and, you know, folks were like, well, if something happens, you have a blue passport, you're just going to fly out of here, aren't you? And I had to own, you know, that like, yeah, I am an American, which allows certain privileges. However, you know, and so being honest with yourself, as difficult as it may be at every step of the process, is so important to engage in this work, because personally, you know, you'll also have a lot on the line as much as you're trying to make this professional impact.
Thank you. Really important. Reflective practitioner mindset is really important, no matter what field you're in, but certainly in international and global contexts, and really making sure you are stepping back and stepping back in kind of constantly. So now it's about 10:45. So we're going to switch over to Liz Paul, as I mentioned. She is from the Wasserman Center for Career Development, and will engage with you a bit on careers in these fields. Liz, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I just want to say what a thrill and honor it has been to be listening to your 3 stories and your career development and different paths. It's been a learning experience for me as well, so thank you for that. I guess I just wanted to start by reflecting too on some of the things that I heard from the 3 of you about different ways that you approach your work, because I think it has a lot of overlap into how you approach job search, whether domestically within the United States or internationally. What I heard about flexibility and reflection and open-mindedness and curiosity is exactly how we would recommend anybody approach their internship or job search, no matter what industry they're going into or where they're going into it. So just to say that that is a sort of consistent attitude that isn't something that you necessarily innately have, but you develop over time and through experience. And I'll also say that NYU has so many ways that you can practice these skills and get more comfortable with them. And the first is starting exactly where we all are here today, of attending events. So my first recommendation is to attend as many of these panels and speaking events and workshops as you can, especially while you're still an NYU student, because they're so plentiful. So certainly looking within the Urban Initiative, as many events as are available there, at Wagner, at the Wasserman Center. I'll plug the Wasserman Center because we have a lot of events all the time. And even beyond NYU. So New York is a rich field full of urban planners of every shape and form. So looking, in your local community, in the New York City community, in the New York State, United States, the globe, really, and especially since everything is, a lot of things are taking place virtually now, there's an even greater opportunity, I think, than normal circumstances, to just be involved in as many things as possible and to learn from experts who are in the field. And asking wonderful questions. I'm looking at the questions coming in the chat and thinking, like, that is exactly how to approach an event like this. Prepare ahead of time, research who the panelists are if you can, prepare some questions if you can. It's a great way to start building rapport with professionals in the field. And one thing that, now that I'm saying that, I'm reminded of is it's a very small world in the urban planning community, even though it seems vast, given that it's happening across the globe in different scopes. But one thing I noticed was there was a connection somewhere, I think, between Elena and Johanna of funding. There's an organization in common in funding. So I want to point out too that the community can be very small, and you never know who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And there's going to be some kind of interaction that may be fruitful for you for a learning experience, a funding experience, a professional opportunity, who knows what. So always be open-minded and on the lookout for that.
Excellent points, Liz. Certainly the people it's not only your network, it's the people they know and they know and they know. Those are your networks as well. And so to use those as much as you can to better understand a particular industry or field and come at it from different perspectives.
Absolutely, yes. And we also have some resources across NYU to help with building those networks. One of them is the Violet Network, which is a relatively new initiative across the university. It's sort of LinkedIn's answer to, or sorry, NYU's answer to LinkedIn, where you can go on the Violet Network and create a professional profile and then search for other students or alumni who are in your field, who've majored in one of the urban programs, who are working in a field or an adjacent field that's interesting to you, who are working in a geographic location that may be interesting to you, who've studied at one of our wonderful global sites. You can search and sort from a variety of different factors and try to develop those relationships that way, because you can schedule informational interviews directly through the system. So it's a really streamlined platform to take what we're doing here today and make it sort of a one-on-one experience and come in with some questions, exploratory questions really, about somebody's career path or their interest or how they got into the field, not necessarily asking for a job right away, but starting to build those relationships. So definitely take advantage of the Violet Network in addition to these sort of easy opportunities to get engaged through these workshops and speaking engagements.
And I will point out once again that our panelists did have experiences that were outside of their home countries that helped them develop perspective and appreciation for other and new perspectives and cultural difference that might have shaped their career paths and their interest in particular areas. So I say, get out there and experience difference. It's a good thing. Chris.
Can I jump in with a question for our panelists, or maybe for Liz? Since we have a group of students attending today who have some interest in global urban careers, do you have any insights or tips you might share for what you think is going to be hot in terms of career areas that are global or urban? Are there things that you see on the horizon that students might be thinking about as places they could focus some energy as they think about future careers?
Yeah, certainly. You know, Johanna could probably speak to this as well. Climate change, resilience, these are going to be the buzzwords. I think also rethinking how we think global also. For a while, at least in Western discourse, it's been, you know, global is happening elsewhere. Like you fly and go help somebody else with, you know, their disaster issue or humanitarian issue, to the point that the United States doesn't even have a framework on how we receive international help. So literally, like after Hurricane Katrina, for example, you had Cuba and all these different countries wanting to help us, and we didn't even know how to take it. We had to send it back, right? So shifting what global looks like, and that global can also be local in interesting ways, is going to be something to grapple with. Particularly as the pandemic, you know, has been called the great equalizer, and that no country has been, you know, unaffected. However, it does change dynamics in terms of the countries, again, the US's of the world, the United Kingdom, who've been able to go and help other places are having to help the home front. And so when you think of global, local capacity building, community empowerment, developing institutions, or helping communities strengthen their sort of institutions and tap into the resources that they already have, versus either waiting for outside help or thinking that there's outside help to even bring, I think is going to be an interesting dimension for us moving forward.
Excellent.
Couldn't agree more. My job got very grounded when the pandemic happened, and we turned, you know, our whole program had to shift and pivot away actually from global to New York City. But a lot of the same things are right here at home. And I think it was a really important moment, I think, for me in reckoning with what Vanessa is describing. You know, I work at Columbia University, and the same systems that have created injustice everywhere are right on my campus at Columbia and exist in the relationship between Columbia and the neighborhood of Harlem and Upper Manhattan. And the impacts that that has on people are just as profound and just as worthwhile. So like, you think a lot of that thinking is really, really important. I also would consider, in a like kind of tactical way of thinking about job searching, There's like the substance and the content of what you're interested in. And I think we're, you know, whether that's transportation or social justice or environment, or whatever kind of categories you think about. But that's, you know, I think moving in a really intersectional direction, and it needs to be. So being flexible to using whatever you're interested in as an entry point to a much, much bigger conversation, and being very flexible in having that approach. And I think in many ways, like in terms of crafting your search, looking for organizations that are similar in value and ethic to you is really important. Knowing how they fund projects, what their criteria is for how they spend money and how they partner with people. Looking for jobs like program management, jobs that involve writing or networks. Those are all really good ways, I think, to get started, because those can often have a global kind of scope or implication, especially in the NGO or philanthropic spaces.
Excellent. Well, I need to wrap up this fantastic hour we've had together. But in doing that, I would just ask the panelists and also Liz, if you don't mind, to give a one-word advice, just one verb that you would advise our students to actualize as they move forward.
I think I have one.
Go, Liz.
It would be initiative in everything, in searching for opportunities and searching people out who you might want to speak to, and in starting any of your own side projects or interests, just go for it. I think we have evidence right here with these three amazing women that it starts somewhere, and it starts with you taking initiative.
Fantastic. Other bits of advice? Vanessa.
You know, yeah, I remember early on someone told me just be. And I was like, what do you mean just be? Like, be what? And be who? Like, I need more, but be. You know, like, be human, be compassionate, be understanding, be bold, you know, be you. There is no one in the world like you. No one can, you know, have your vantage point, offer the things that you offer, see, you know, you know, there were so many times that I thought that, like, oh, this is obvious. Like, you know, everyone has seen this, and I would speak up and feel like, oh my God, we've never thought this, you know, thought about this, you know, from that perspective. So be fully, take up space in the rooms that you occupy, and like Liz said, go for it, go for it. You'll learn. Failure is a learning opportunity as well. But just be. Excellent.
Well, I can't top that, but I guess I'll go with be focused and be curious on the B front. I find oftentimes, especially with young planners or urban students, they're excited to be in the space, and they don't necessarily want to box themselves in, so they do a little bit of everything. And my advice would be, like, pick one thing that you want to excel in and just drill into it. And oftentimes having that background and knowledge is what is gonna get you the job and the opportunity. Sometimes we're a little scattered, and that's the nature, especially of like urban work. There is a little bit of everything, but have one thing that's your expertise. And I don't know what that is for each of you, but that's my advice.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to thank Chris Day, Vice Provost, for all her leadership within the Urban Initiative at NYU, Raquel Forrester for all her fantastic help, the committees who've been working on various aspects of the Urban Initiative, all our panelists today who were fantastic and led to this rich discussion, and all of the students who joined, the wonderful questions that you've posed. And I really appreciate all of your input, suggestions, and willingness to tell your story. I'm putting in the chat ways that students can go take the initiative to be focused and curious and just be somewhere else in the world. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and this provides food for thought throughout your week. So thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thanks a
day.
lot. Bye.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.